The blood reached her doorstep before the Mafia Boss did. Elena Vasquez heard it before she understood it. A metallic click, thin and precise, drifting down from somewhere above the rooftops of Ashford Street. Not a car backfiring. Not construction. A bolt sliding into place, followed by the faint scrape of a bipod against concrete. She had spent 25 years without sight, and 20 of those years learning that sound never lied the way faces did. Her violin bow stopped mid-note. Around her, the evening crowd kept moving. Coffee cups, phone calls, a busker's tip jar rattling with coins. Nobody else had frozen. Nobody else's spine had gone rigid at a sound 4 floors up and 60 feet away. That was the gift and the curse of losing your eyes. The world got louder in the places sighted people had stopped listening to. She turned her head, tracking. The click had come from the roofline above the flower shop, angled down toward the man who had been standing at the edge of the small crowd for the last 10 minutes. The one who never clapped, never dropped a bill in her case, but stayed. She'd noticed him only because his stillness had a weight to it, the way certain silences in a room told you someone dangerous had entered. A second sound followed the first. Breath control. Someone exhaling slow, the way a shooter does before a trigger breaks. Elena did not think. She dropped the violin against her shoulder strap, lunged 3 steps toward the stranger's voice shadow, and shoved him sideways with both hands. "Get down now." The gunshot cracked a half-second later, and the space where his head had been shattered into brick dust and glass from the flower shop window behind him. Screaming erupted. Feet scattered in every direction. Elena hit the pavement hard, her cane skidding from her hand, her violin case crushed beneath her elbow, and a stranger's body covering hers before she even understood he had moved. "Don't move," he said, low, controlled, a voice built for command rather than comfort. "Don't move until I say." Another shot. It went wide, chewing into a parked car's fender. Then nothing. No third shot. As if the sniper had been given an order to withdraw, or had lost his angle. The man above her spoke 2 words into a small radio clipped inside his jacket, words that would mean nothing to her yet and everything later. "Lock it down." Within 90 seconds, black SUVs sealed both ends of Ashford Street. Men in dark coats moved with an economy of motion that had nothing to do with the police. One of them addressed the stranger not by name, but by title. Quiet, immediate, absolute. "Boss. We need to move you." The word landed strange in Elena's ears, the way a foreign language sounds recognizable before you can place it. She had just put her body between a bullet and a man his own people called a mafia boss. He crouched beside her, and she felt the shift of his coat, smelled gunmetal and cedar. "You saved my life," he said. "Which means you just became a problem for the person who wanted me dead." Elena's fingers found her violin case, cracked but intact, and clutched it like the only solid thing left in a world that had just tilted sideways. "Who are you?" she asked. He didn't answer the question she'd asked. He answered the one underneath it. Someone who doesn't leave people behind who bleed for him. Pause, calculating, final. "You're coming with me." Sirens rose in the distance, too late, as they always were on streets this man controlled. Elena had no name for him yet, no face to imagine, only a voice, a title, and the certainty that the rooftop above the flower shop had not finished with either of them. 6 hours earlier, Elena had been arguing with a pharmacist over $4. "The insurance covers it," she said, sliding her card across the counter for the second time. "I checked yesterday." "Not this generic," the pharmacist said, not unkindly, just tired. "You're 11 short." Elena did the math the way she did everything now. Quickly, silently, without complaint, because complaint cost energy she didn't have to spare. She pulled 3 folded bills from her coat pocket, the tip money from Tuesday's performance, and pushed them across instead of the 4th pill bottle she'd meant to buy for herself. Her sister's seizure medication mattered more than her own migraine prescription. It always did. "I'll come back for mine," she told the pharmacist, and they both understood she wouldn't, not this month. That was Elena in one motion, paying for someone else's survival before her own comfort, and returning the smaller kindness without being asked. Her sister Mia was 17, epileptic, and living with their aunt 3 streets over because Elena's studio apartment had no room and no money for a second bed. Elena visited every day anyway, walked the route by memory and cane, and played violin on Ashford Street 4 evenings a week because tips there were better than the community center's wage. The violin itself had been her father's, a scarred, honey-colored instrument with a hairline crack near the scroll that no luthier had ever fully repaired, because Elena refused to let anyone touch the one object she still owned that had existed before the fire. She could not have said why she trusted the instrument's voice more than any other sound in her life, only that when she pressed the bow to the strings, the world organized itself into something she could finally hold still. On her way to Ashford Street that afternoon, she'd stopped, as she always did, outside the bakery on the corner to count the exact number of footsteps between the curb and the doorframe. 11, unchanged in 6 years, because a world that could rearrange itself without warning had taught her to keep private maps of everything that still made sense. It was a habit she rarely thought about anymore, the way sighted people rarely thought about blinking. It would matter more than she could imagine before the week was finished. She had been blind since she was 5 years old, since a night she remembered only as heat and noise and her father's hand letting go of hers. Nobody had ever given her a clean answer about the accident, only soft words that changed shape depending on who told them. She had stopped asking. Some griefs you carried instead of solving. Music had become the replacement sense. She didn't just hear it. She mapped rooms with it, read people through the rhythm of their breathing, judged danger by the particular tightness that entered a stranger's exhale. Her aunt called it uncanny. Elena called it the only inheritance her blindness had ever given her. That evening on Ashford Street, she'd noticed the stranger the way she noticed weather changing. He arrived without footsteps announcing arrival, meaning shoes built for silence, not comfort. He didn't fidget. He didn't check a phone. His stillness had gravity, pulling the sounds of the street subtly out of their normal orbit. Even the pigeons gave him space. She played a Bach partita, something aching and slow, and felt him listening the way almost no one listened anymore. Completely without distraction, as if the music were the only thing he'd allowed himself in a long time. 10 minutes earlier, a boy of perhaps 9 had tried to lift a wallet from an older woman's open purse 2 feet from where Elena stood. She'd heard the shift in his footsteps before anyone saw his hand move, and had simply raised her voice mid-song. "Careful, ma'am, your purse is open." Loud enough that the woman clutched it shut and the boy melted back into the crowd unnoticed by everyone except Elena, who had chosen a warning over an accusation because she remembered what it felt like to be a frightened child assumed guilty of things larger than herself. It cost her nothing to say it. It would have cost the boy everything if she hadn't. Then, underneath the last movement, she heard it. A click far too clean to be street noise, 4 floors up, followed by the controlled hush of a breath a person takes before doing something irreversible. She had heard that exact pattern once before years ago, in a memory she kept locked far down where she didn't look. Blink, breath, silence, then heat. Her body reacted before her mind caught up to the memory it had triggered. She crossed the space between herself and the stranger and put her hands on him, shoved with everything her thin frame had, and the world exploded into gunfire and screaming glass. She had crossed a line the moment her palms touched his chest. There was no walking that back, not with a bullet lodged in the flower shop's brick where her own hands had been half a second before, not with a man's guards now closing around her like a wall being built in real time. "She's a witness," one of the guards said flatly, as if that word alone were a verdict. The stranger, the Mafia Boss, though Elena did not yet have that full shape of him, crouched at her side while his men worked. "What's your name?" "Elena." Her hands were shaking now that the adrenaline had nowhere left to go. "Why was someone shooting at you?" He didn't answer that either. He simply said, "You're not going home tonight," and the certainty in his voice told her this wasn't a suggestion, It was the first order in a chain of consequences she hadn't chosen and couldn't yet see the end of. The convoy moved through the city like a closed fist. Elena sat in the back of an SUV that smelled of leather and gun oil, her violin case wedged between her knees, listening to a silence so absolute it had its own texture. No radio. No idle conversation. Just the low hum of tires and, beside her, the measured breathing of the man who had not left her side since the rooftop. "You still haven't told me your name," she said. "Dante Moretti." "Beep. Some people call me the Mafia Boss of this city. I'd rather you call me Dante." She turned the two titles over, the plain human name and the label that made grown men in dark suits reposition themselves whenever he walked past. Both true. Neither complete. And the sniper. "Someone paid to end me before I found out who paid them." His voice didn't rise, didn't perform outrage. It was worse than anger. It was arithmetic, a man already calculating losses. "You put yourself between me and a bullet for a stranger. That doesn't happen by accident on my streets." "I didn't do it for you," Elena said. "I did it because I heard it coming and you didn't." Something in his silence changed texture. Not offense, something closer to attention. The gates of the Moretti estate opened without a word being spoken. The guards there had already been told who was arriving and in what condition. Elena heard the transformation of sound the moment they crossed the property line. Gravel under tires, a fountain somewhere to the left, dogs that didn't bark because they'd been trained into obedient silence. Power, she was learning, didn't announce itself with noise. It arrived in the absence of noise other people were too afraid to make. Inside, the staff moved like a rehearsed orchestra reacting to a conductor's smallest gesture. A woman's voice, sharp, protective, met them in the hallway. "Dante, what happened?" "Later, Rosa." 2 words, and the questioning stopped instantly. Elena filed that away. Whoever Dante Moretti was, his authority required no volume at all. A second man fell into step beside them. His gait heavier, deliberate, a man who had clearly walked this hallway 1,000 times before. "Rifle casings already gone," he said without preamble. "Whoever this was, they cleared out before our men even reached the roof." "Elena, this is Marco," Dante said. "He runs my security personally. If I'm not in the room, he is the next voice you trust." "You're the one who said lock it down," Elena said, recognizing the particular gravel in his tone from the radio. "Wasn't me," Marco said, surprised into something almost like a laugh. "That was him. Boss doesn't delegate the words that matter." There was no mockery in it, only the plain loyalty of a man who had decided a long time ago exactly whose orders he trusted with his life. He led her, one hand at her elbow, careful, not presumptuous, into a room that smelled of leather furniture and old paper. "You'll stay in the East Wing. Guarded. Nobody touches you without going through me first." "I have a sister," Elena said immediately. "Mia. She needs her medication tonight, and if I don't show up at my aunt's she'll worry herself into a seizure." A pause, the sound of a man recalibrating, unused to being told his plans had a hole in them. "Give me the address." "You're not sending strangers to my family. I'm sending people who will keep her safer than you can right now." His tone sharpened, not cruel, just absolute. "Someone tried to kill me tonight in front of witnesses. That means whoever hired the shooter now knows your face too." "I am not debating this." Elena's jaw tightened. She had spent her whole adult life refusing to be handled, refusing pity dressed up as protection, and here was a stranger, a mafia boss, rearranging her family's safety with the same ease he'd ordered a street locked down. "Fine," she said. "But you tell me the truth about what's happening. All of it. Or I walk out that gate blind and alone before I let you decide my life for me." For a long moment he said nothing, and she heard, underneath his silence, something almost like respect settling into place. "Bring the sister here too," he finally told the guard at the door. quietly. Then to Elena, "You saved my life on a street I control completely. That means someone got past defenses that have never failed before. I intend to find out how, and you're the only person who heard it happen before I did. So I'm useful," Elena said flatly. "You're alive," he corrected, "which right now is a rarer thing than useful." Somewhere above the estate, a second team of men Elena couldn't see were already tracing a rifle casing back to a rooftop 3 blocks from Ashford Street, and finding, to their considerable unease, that the shooter had vanished as if he'd known the exact layout of Moretti-controlled security before the first shot was ever fired. Marco delivered that finding to Dante in the hallway outside Elena's room an hour later. His voice pitched low enough that he clearly assumed she couldn't hear through the door. He was wrong. "Whoever set this up knew our rooftop rotation schedule down to the minute," Marco said. "That's not outside information, boss. That's someone who sat in our own briefings." "Keep that between us," Dante said, "until I know who." Elena, sitting motionless on the other side of the door with her violin case still clutched against her chest, understood before either man returned to check on her that the danger circling this house had not ended on Ashford Street. It had simply followed her indoors, wearing a face she hadn't yet been permitted to see. Mia arrived past midnight, escorted by 2 guards who treated her like glass and answered none of her frightened questions. Elena heard her sister's uneven breathing the moment she entered the hallway and crossed the room in 4 steps to hold her. "They wouldn't tell me anything," Mia whispered. "Elena, whose house is this?" "Someone who's keeping us safe," Elena said, and hated how uncertain the sentence sounded even to her own ears. Dante appeared in the doorway. Elena recognized his particular stillness before anyone spoke his name. "Your sister will have a room beside yours. A private nurse arrives within the hour for her medication schedule." He addressed Mia directly, gently, in a voice Elena hadn't heard him use yet. "Nobody in this house will frighten you. You have my word." Mia, 17 and unused to men who spoke like verdicts, only nodded. When she'd been settled, Elena found her way back to the hallway, tracing the wall with her fingertips, and Dante's voice met her before she'd gone 10 feet. "You shouldn't wander this house without an escort." "I've navigated cities without my sight since I was 5, Elena said. "I think I can manage a hallway." "That's not what I meant." A pause, and something in his tone shifted. Not command now, something closer to restraint. "There are men in this house who work for me and men who used to. I don't yet know which is which. Until I do, I want you where I can account for you." "That sounds like protection or a cage," Elena said. "I can't always tell the difference with you." He didn't answer immediately, and the silence had weight to it, the kind she'd learned to read as a man measuring a truth he wasn't ready to hand over. "My father built this empire on the idea that loyalty could be bought and fear could replace both," he said finally. "I've spent 10 years trying to build something with fewer bodies under it. Tonight proved I haven't finished. Is that supposed to reassure me?" "No," he said. "It's supposed to be honest. You asked for that." The following 2 days brought no answers, only sharper edges. A courier arrived with a bouquet addressed to Elena, an obscene gesture from a rival capo named Renzo Falcone, Dante's own underboss, who made a public show of welcoming the woman who saved the family's future. Elena heard the performance in his voice the moment he entered the drawing room to introduce himself. Too smooth, too warm, a man auditioning sincerity he didn't own. "The famous violinist," Renzo said, taking her hand before she could withdraw it. "Dante doesn't usually bring outsiders into the estate. You must be special." "I heard a gun before anyone else did," Elena said. "That's not special. That's practice." "Modesty," Renzo said, amused. "How rare." Dante's voice entered the room a half-second later, quieter than Renzo's and twice as final. "Renzo. She's tired." Renzo released her hand immediately. Elena noted the speed of his obedience, The practiced ease of a man who knew exactly how far he could push before consequences arrived. Of course, boss. Just being neighborly. After he left, Elena heard Dante exhale slowly, the sound of a temper being held on a very short leash. Stay away from him when I'm not near, he said. Why? Because Renzo has been loyal to this family for 11 years, and loyalty that old sometimes hides the oldest resentments. He didn't elaborate further, but Elena heard the specific quality of his unease. Not suspicion exactly, something closer to guilt he hadn't earned yet and feared he might. Later that afternoon, Elena found the kitchen by counting doorways from her room. 9 she'd already memorized, and discovered a young housemaid, barely out of her teens, crying quietly over a shattered porcelain vase that had belonged, the girl whispered, to Dante's late mother. Renzo told me to move it and I dropped it. He'll have me dismissed. Then we glue it before anyone official sees it, Elena said, kneeling by feel to gather the pieces, matching their broken edges by touch faster than the sighted girl could by sight. Nobody has to know whose hands it was in. When Dante found them 20 minutes later, the vase repaired well enough to pass a casual glance. He said nothing about the mess, only studied Elena for a long moment. You didn't have to protect her. Someone protected my sister's medication bill once without being asked, Elena said. It didn't cost me anything to return it. It cost you an afternoon, he said. That's not nothing to most people who've been handed as little as you have. Maybe that's exactly why it isn't nothing, Elena said, and heard in his silence something shift again. Not restraint this time, something closer to being seen clearly for the first time in longer than he could admit. That same night, a fire alarm in the East Wing turned out on inspection to be a deliberately triggered false signal. Meant, Elena would later understand, to draw the guards from her door for the 90 seconds it would have taken someone to reach her room unseen. Nothing happened. But Dante arrived at her door within the same 90 seconds, breathing hard, having crossed half the estate the moment the alarm sounded. You came yourself, Elena said before she could stop herself. Not your men. I don't send other people when it's you, he said, and the admission seemed to surprise him as much as it surprised her. Possessive, unguarded, a crack in the composure he wore like armor. He caught himself instantly. That's not. I mean the situation requires. You don't have to fix the sentence, Elena said quietly. I heard the true one already. He said nothing, but she felt him remain in the doorway a full 10 seconds longer than any explanation required. And when he finally spoke again, his voice had gone low, careful, deliberately restrained. Whoever tried to draw my guards away tonight has access inside this house, he said. That means the traitor isn't outside my walls. It's already living behind them. Down in the estate security office, a technician would later find the false alarm had been triggered from a terminal only 6 people had clearance to use, and one of those 6 had logged in from a location that, on paper, placed him 50 miles away at the exact moment the alarm went off. The ledger arrived disguised as a returned favor. For 2 days after the false alarm, Dante had grown quieter, spending long hours locked in his study with Marco and Aldo, and Elena had learned to read the tension in the house the way she read weather before a storm. Doors closing a half-second faster than usual, footsteps in the hallway pausing outside her room longer than protocol required, a household holding its breath around a truth not yet spoken aloud. She had asked twice what they were searching for. Both times, Dante had deflected with the same careful gentleness that told her, more than any answer could, that whatever they'd found involved her directly. Dante's private investigator, a quiet man named Aldo who had worked for the family longer than Dante had been alive, delivered it personally, sealed in an evidence bag recovered from a storage unit belonging to Elena's late father. You said your father was an accountant, Dante said carefully, setting the bag on the table between them. Elena's fingers found its edges, the worn leather binding beneath the plastic. He was, she said, before the accident that took my sight. I don't remember much beyond the noise. His name was Marcus Vasquez, Dante said, and something in the careful way he pronounced it told Elena the name already meant something to him. He kept books for my father's organization for 6 years. Skimming numbers to protect a family he thought the commission would otherwise destroy. Elena's hands went still on the leather. You knew who my father was. This whole time. I suspected the moment I heard your name in the car, Dante admitted. I didn't know for certain until tonight. Say it, Elena said, voice shaking now. Whatever you're circling. Say it plainly. Dante's chair creaked as he leaned forward, and when he spoke, his voice had lost every trace of command, replaced by something raw. Your father discovered another man inside my father's organization was stealing from both sides, skimming payments meant for the commission and pocketing the difference, then framing a rival family to cover the theft. Your father wrote it all down. He was going to bring it to my father the week of the accident that blinded you. The room seemed to tilt. Elena's memory, heat, noise, her father's hand letting go, rearranged itself into a shape she'd never let herself see clearly before. It wasn't an accident. No, Dante said. It was an explosion meant to destroy the evidence and silence the man carrying it. My father ordered a warning delivered to Marcus Vasquez. Nothing lethal, a message only. But someone escalated that order into something final. Someone who had far more to lose if the ledger ever surfaced. Who? The word came out of Elena like a blade. I don't have proof yet, Dante said. But everything in this ledger points toward a name I've trusted for 11 years. Renzo. Elena said it before he could, and the certainty in her own voice startled her. 3 sharp foreshadowed details clicking into a single shape. Renzo's too smooth introduction the day she arrived. His obedience that came a half-second too fast to be genuine, and the false alarm triggered from a terminal only 6 people could access, one of whom the technician had privately flagged as off-site but somehow logged in. Dante didn't confirm or deny it. I need more than instinct before I move against my own underboss. You're protecting him, Elena said, disbelief sharpening into anger. Even now. I'm protecting the truth, Dante said. Because if I'm wrong, I destroy a man who's bled for this family for over a decade. And if I move too soon, whoever's really guilty disappears before I can make them answer for what they did to your father. To you. Elena stood, breathing hard, her whole understanding of the last 5 days rearranging itself around one unbearable fact. The man who had pulled her into his protection, whose house she now slept in, was connected to the night that stole her sight. Not as the man who ordered it, but as the son of the empire that had failed to stop it. You should have told me the moment you suspected, she said. I know, Dante said, and for the first time since the rooftop. His voice carried no authority at all, only guilt worn threadbare from years of carrying it silently. I've spent 10 years trying to atone for what my father's organization did to families like yours. I didn't know how to tell the daughter of one of them that I'd been the reason her father never came home. Elena's anger didn't dissolve, but something beneath it cracked open. Grief long buried finally given a shape, a name, a direction. The night of the explosion, she said slowly, memory sharpening now that she had permission to look at it directly. I heard a voice before the fire. A man arguing with my father. I was 5. I never placed it. But I remember the rhythm of it, the way he stretched his vowels when he was angry. She thought of Renzo's voice in the drawing room 2 days earlier. The famous violinist. You must be special. The same stretched vowels. The same rhythm, 20 years older but structurally unchanged. It's him, she said, cold certainty replacing grief. I don't need your proof. I have 20 years of memory that just found its match. Dante went very still. If you're right, he said quietly, then the man who blinded you is the same man currently plotting to finish what that explosion started. And he's been inside every room we've spoken in since you arrived. Elena's hands found the ledger again, tracing its cracked spine as though it might yield some final certainty her memory hadn't already given her. 20 years, she said. 20 years of thinking my blindness was just something that happened to me like weather, like bad luck. And it was a decision. Someone's decision made to protect a lie. I know that anger, Dante said. I've spent my whole adult life circling a smaller version of it, wondering how much of what my father built was worth the bodies underneath it. I never had a name to put to the worst of it until tonight. He hesitated, and when he spoke again his voice had dropped into something almost unbearably careful. I need you to understand that finding out doesn't undo what it cost you. I can't give you back 20 years or your sight, or the father who should have watched you grow up. All I can give you is what happens next. Then give me that, Elena said. Not protection. Not a locked room with guards outside it. The truth, and a chance to stand in the same room as the man who took my sight, so I can finally decide for myself what justice looks like. Dante didn't answer immediately, and in the space of that silence Elena heard something she hadn't expected. Not a mafia boss weighing strategy, but a man wrestling with the difference between keeping her safe and keeping her caged, a distinction he was only now beginning to understand he'd blurred without meaning to. I won't promise you a room, he finally said. I'll promise you the truth, delivered as fast as I can confirm it, and a voice in what happens once I have it. That's the most honest thing I can offer someone I've already failed once by staying silent too long. It wasn't everything Elena wanted. But it was, she recognized, the first time since the rooftop that he had answered her as an equal instead of a responsibility. The charity gala was Renzo's idea. A public appearance, he'd argued, to reassure the commission that the rooftop shooting hadn't shaken the family's control. Dante agreed reluctantly, on the condition Elena remain at the estate under guard. She didn't listen. I won't hide while he performs innocence in a ballroom, Elena told Dante, and though his jaw tightened with the particular fury of a man watching someone he'd grown possessive of walk toward danger willingly, he didn't forbid her outright, a boundary she'd fought hard to win from him over the preceding days, and one he honored now even as it cost him visibly. You stay within arm's reach of me the entire night, he said instead. That's not negotiable. She agreed, not knowing it would be the last calm agreement between them for a long while. Marco met them at the estate gates before the gala. His voice pitched low as he briefed Dante on the ballroom's security layout. Exits, camera blind spots, a guest list cross-checked twice against known rivals. Renzo insisted on handling the venue arrangements personally, Marco added, almost as an afterthought. Said it would look strange if he didn't, given his position. Watch him anyway, Dante said. Always do, Marco replied, and something in the exchange told Elena that Marco's loyalty, unlike Renzo's, had never once required a performance to prove itself. The ballroom was a wall of sound to her. Glasses, orchestras, 100 overlapping conversations, and beneath it all, Renzo's voice moved through the room like a current, charming donors, laughing at the right moments, every gesture rehearsed. Elena stayed close to Dante's side, her hand resting lightly at his elbow, and felt him tense every time Renzo's voice drew near. You look tense, she murmured to him beneath the orchestra's swell. I don't like performing normalcy for a room full of people who'd celebrate my funeral before the flowers wilted, Dante said. Renzo included. Then don't perform it, Elena said. Just survive it. I'll tell you the moment anything sounds wrong. That's supposed to be my job tonight. Tonight, Elena said. It's both of ours. Halfway through the evening, a donor pressed too close to Elena at the bar, his hand landing on her waist under the guise of steadying her, his breath thick with champagne. Before she could pull away herself, Dante's hand closed around the man's wrist with a quiet, absolute pressure that made the donor go pale and mumble an apology, releasing her instantly. Touch her again, Dante said, low enough that only the three of them heard it, and I won't be nearly this polite the second time. Dante. Elena started, half in protest at being defended without being asked. I know, he said before she could finish. You don't need me to fight your battles. But some men only understand a boundary when it's enforced by someone they're afraid of, and I'd rather be that than watch you handle it alone in a room full of my own guests. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was closer to one than anything he'd offered before, and Elena let it stand, filing away the distinction between being owned and being defended, a line she intended to keep drawing clearly for as long as this lasted between them. It happened during the toast. The lights dimmed for a photograph. In the 90 seconds of confusion, camera flashes, applause, Dante turning to accept a donor's handshake, a hand closed around Elena's arm from behind, gloved, strong, and a cloth pressed hard over her nose and mouth before she could scream. The last thing she registered before the room dissolved into static was a familiar stretched vowel, murmured close to her ear. "You should have stayed blind to more than just the room, little violinist." She woke in darkness that had nothing to do with her blindness. The deep, close, echoing dark of somewhere underground. Concrete beneath her, damp air, the distant drip of water. Her wrists were bound. Her violin case, she realized with a jolt of despair, was gone. Footsteps approached. Renzo's rhythm, unmistakable now that she had no polite reason left to doubt it. "Your father should have taken the warning quietly," Renzo said. His charm entirely gone now, replaced by something flat and businesslike. Instead he wrote everything down like a fool who thought paperwork could save him. "I gave the order myself. Dante's father wanted a broken window. I wanted a dead problem." Pause, almost thoughtful. "You were supposed to die in that fire too. Small mercies that you didn't. It made for a useful decade of no one asking questions." "Dante will find you," Elena said, forcing steadiness into her voice. "Dante will find a woman he can't save in time," Renzo said. "That's the whole plan, sweetheart. He comes for you alone to the one place he trusts least to refuse him, and my men finish what a rooftop sniper started 5 days ago. Your rescue becomes his funeral. Poetic, don't you think?" Elena's stomach turned cold, but underneath the fear, something colder and clearer took hold, the same instinct that had saved Dante's life on Ashford Street. She listened, truly listened past her own fear to the room around her. The particular echo of the ceiling telling her ceiling height, water dripping from a specific direction telling her a drainage grate, distant traffic noise filtering faintly from one wall telling her which side of the building faced a street. She had spent 20 years mapping the world through sound because sight had been taken from her. Renzo had made the same mistake Dante's guards had made on the rooftop. He'd assumed her blindness made her helplessness itself, not that it had made her the most dangerous listener in any room she occupied. Before he left, Renzo had crouched close enough that Elena caught the faint trace of cologne beneath the damp concrete smell of the room. The same cologne, she realized with cold clarity, that had lingered on the bouquet card he'd sent the week before, and further back, on a memory she had never let herself examine. A man leaning close to her father the night of the fire, murmuring something she'd been too young and too frightened to understand. 3 separate moments, 20 years apart, carrying the identical signature. It was no longer instinct. It was evidence, filed the same way she filed every sound that mattered. "One more thing," Renzo said, pausing at the door. "Your violin case. I had a man burn it, out of spectacle more than necessity." Seemed a fitting bookend. The lie was almost convincing, almost. Elena heard the small hesitation before the word burn, the same hesitation she'd catalogued in her father's ledger margins only hours earlier. The rhythm of a man protecting something he hadn't actually done, because destroying an object with sentimental weight risked drawing more attention than simply keeping it hidden. She said nothing. She only listened and filed that too. When the door shut and his footsteps retreated up a stairwell she now knew the exact number of steps to. 14, uneven on the 9th. Elena began working her bound wrists against the rough edge of a pipe fitting she'd located with her fingertips within 30 seconds of being left alone. Above ground, Dante had already discovered her missing from the gala floor, and the sound that came out of him when a guard reported it, Elena would learn later, silenced the entire ballroom faster than any order he'd given all night. He'd overturned tables searching, grabbed Renzo by the collar demanding answers with a violence his own men had never witnessed from him, and only stopped when Renzo, with practiced innocence, discovered a ransom note planted in Elena's coat, an address, a demand, and an ultimatum. Come alone or she dies within the hour. Dante knew, standing in the wreckage of the gala, that he was being led into exactly the trap Renzo intended. He knew it, and he went anyway. Not blindly, but because the ledger, and the years of buried guilt it represented, had finally converged on one truth he could no longer avoid. He had let a woman he'd sworn to protect fall into the hands of the very man responsible for taking her sight in the first place, and there would be no forgiving himself if he hesitated now. The ransom address led to a rooftop, the same architectural silhouette. Dante realized the instant his convoy arrived, as the flower shop building where Renzo's hired sniper had first tried to kill him 5 nights earlier. Renzo hadn't chosen it by coincidence. He wanted the story to end where it began, evidence and witnesses erased in the same location, the whole affair folded closed like a book he could finally burn. Marco had argued against it in the car, low and urgent. "Boss, this reeks of a setup. Let me put a man on that roof before you ever set foot on the stairs." Renzo said alone, Dante said. "If he sees so much as a shadow that isn't mine, he kills her before I clear the door. And if you go up there with nothing but your hands, he kills you both anyway. Then you'll already be moving the second you hear the first shot," Dante said. 2 blocks isn't far when it has to be. Trust the plan you'd trust from me on any other night." Marco held his stare a beat longer than protocol allowed between a boss and his security chief, then nodded once, the gesture of a man swallowing an objection because loyalty sometimes meant obeying an order you privately believed might get someone killed. 2 blocks, he said. "I'll be counting every second of it." Dante climbed the stairwell alone, exactly as instructed, his men holding position 2 blocks out per Renzo's explicit demand. Every step he took was a calculation between fury and control, and by the time he reached the rooftop door, only control remained visible on his face. Renzo waited at the ledge, Elena kneeling beside him, wrists still bound, a gun resting loosely, deliberately, tauntingly, near her temple rather than pressed against it. He wanted Dante to see the choice before he made it. "You came alone," Renzo said. "Good. Some habits from your father were worth keeping." "Let her go," Dante said. "This is between us." "It was always between us," Renzo said. "Your father built an empire on my labor and gave the throne to his blood instead of the man who actually held it together. I fixed a leak in that empire 11 years ago, and you've spent a decade thanking me for my loyalty instead of noticing I never forgave the insult." He gestured toward Elena. "She was collateral then. She's a loose end now. Nothing personal." "It's entirely personal," Dante said. "You just haven't admitted that to yourself yet." "Careful with the moral high ground," Renzo said, and something in his voice sharpened, revealing a card he'd clearly been saving. "Your convoy isn't coming, by the way. I had a man reroute Marco's team 20 minutes ago with a false report of gunfire 3 streets over. Professional courtesy, so you'd know exactly how alone you really are before this ends." He smiled thinly at Dante's stillness. Your father's habit of trusting radios instead of eyes finally caught up to his son. For one cold second, the plan Dante had walked in with, buy time, wait for Marco's team to close the distance, collapsed entirely, and Elena heard the shift in his breathing that told her he'd registered the same thing she had. They were in fact entirely alone on this rooftop, with no rescue arriving in time to matter. While the 2 men spoke, Elena had already done what 20 years of listening had trained her to do without being told. She had counted the rooftop's dimensions by the echo of every voice, located the ledge's exact distance by the wind pattern crossing it, and identified, from the particular double click she'd first heard on Ashford Street and had spent 5 sleepless nights unable to forget, that a second shooter, Renzo's rooftop sniper from the original attempt, was positioned on the adjacent building, rifle already assembled, waiting for Renzo's signal to finish Dante the moment the confrontation ended. She had one weapon left. Her own voice, her memory, and the ledger's proof now finally understood. You said my father wrote everything down like a fool, Elena said loudly, cutting across the men's standoff. You were wrong. He didn't just write numbers. He wrote your voice pattern into his notes. The exact rhythm you use when you're lying versus when you're not. I've heard both tonight. You're doing the lying one right now. It was a bluff built from a fragment of truth. Her father had annotated behavioral tells in his ledger margins, details Dante had shown her only hours before the gala, but the bluff struck exactly where Renzo's confidence was thinnest. His grip on the gun shifted, a half-second of genuine alarm crossing a face built for performance. That half-second was enough. Dante moved. He closed the distance in 3 strides, driving Renzo's gun arm upward as the weapon discharged harmlessly into open sky, and the 2 men crashed into the ledge in a struggle that had 11 years of buried resentment behind every blow. Renzo, cornered and desperate, screamed toward the neighboring rooftop, the true signal for his hidden shooter to fire regardless of who was hit. Elena heard the click before either man did. The same click from Ashford Street. The same breath before the trigger broke. Down! She screamed, throwing her still-bound body sideways into Dante's legs with every ounce of strength she had, exactly as she had done 5 nights earlier for a stranger whose name she hadn't yet known. The bullet meant for Dante's chest tore instead through Renzo's shoulder as he stumbled into its path mid-struggle. A final, brutal irony neither man had intended. Renzo collapsed against the ledge, screaming, and for a moment the rooftop held nothing but the ringing echo of the shot and Elena's own ragged breathing. It was Marco's voice that broke the silence next, shouting up the stairwell. Not 2 blocks away after all, but closing the last of the distance at a dead run. Having caught the false gunfire report for the lie, it was the moment his own men reported no shots fired anywhere near the location he'd been redirected to. Boss, we're coming up. Here, Dante called back, voice raw. Secure the adjacent roof. There's a second shooter. Within moments, Dante's own men, arriving faster than Renzo had gambled on, thanks to Marco's instinct to double back the second the reroute felt wrong, breached the rooftop access door, weapons raised, the standoff finally, irreversibly ending. A second team, moving in low across the neighboring building's fire escape, found the hired sniper still repositioning for a shot that would never come, and took him without a struggle once he saw how thoroughly the odds had reversed. Dante disarmed the wounded Renzo himself, kneeling over the man who had ordered his father's warning turned into a murder, who had blinded a child to protect a decade-old theft, who had orchestrated a second assassination attempt using the same rooftop that had failed to kill him the first time. Why, Dante said, and it wasn't really a question anymore, just the last piece of grief he needed spoken aloud. Come after me now, after 11 years of silence. Because she remembered, Renzo said through gritted teeth, nodding weakly toward Elena. The one person who should have died in that fire 20 years ago turned out to be the only witness who could still place my voice at the scene. I should have finished the job properly the first time. Dante's hands, still holding Renzo's collar, went white-knuckled with restraint, the old code of his family screaming for the ending Renzo deserved. But he had spent 10 years trying to build something with fewer bodies beneath it, and Elena's voice, steady behind him even now, held him to that promise. Don't, she said. Killing him here makes you exactly what your father was. Let the commission judge him with the ledger as evidence. Let the truth outlive the violence for once. Dante held Renzo's stare a long moment, a mafia boss weighing the entirety of his inheritance against the woman who had just saved his life for the second time in 5 days. And then he stood, releasing Renzo to his own men instead of his own fury. Take him to the commission, Dante ordered, voice restored to its familiar controlled authority. Alive. With the ledger. Let every family in this city see exactly what loyalty is worth when it's built on lies. As his men moved to secure Renzo, Dante crossed the rooftop and knelt beside Elena, cutting her bindings free with steady, careful hands, the same hands that 5 nights earlier had shoved her to safety before either of them had a name for the other. You came alone into a trap you knew was a trap, Elena said, voice raw. For me. You warned a stranger about a rooftop sniper without knowing anything about him, Dante said. I think we're even. Marco crossed the rooftop to stand beside them as paramedics arrived for Renzo, his expression unreadable in the way of a man who had just watched 11 years of trusted history collapse into evidence bags and handcuffs. I should have caught it sooner, he said quietly. He signed off on my rotations. I never once questioned the schedule he gave me. None of us questioned him, Dante said. That was the entire point of 11 years of good behavior. Don't carry what he built to hide from. Below them, the street had begun filling with the low blue pulse of arriving vehicles. Not police, not yet, but 2 more black SUVs bearing the quiet insignia of the commission itself, summoned the moment Marco confirmed Renzo's capture over the radio. Elena listened to their doors opening in practiced unison, to men speaking Dante's title with the same immediate deference she'd heard from his own household on the very first night, and understood, more clearly than any explanation could have given her, exactly how large the world was that had almost swallowed her whole. 3 weeks later, the commission confirmed what Marcus Vasquez's ledger had proven all along. Renzo Falcone had orchestrated the theft, the false framing of a rival family, and the explosion that killed Elena's father and blinded a 5-year-old girl who had grown up never knowing why. Renzo would answer to the commission's own code, a resolution older and colder than any court Elena could have taken him to. But the truth, finally, belonged to the daughter he'd tried twice to silence. Dante used the same authority that had once locked down streets and silenced rooms to clear Elena's father's name publicly among the families who still remembered him only as a suspected traitor. Marcus Vasquez was buried a second time, in reputation if not in body, as the man who had risked everything trying to expose corruption rather than commit it. Mia's medical care moved permanently under Dante's private physicians, not as a possession purchased, but as a promise kept without conditions attached. She stayed in the estate's east wing through the end of the school year, and for the first time since her diagnosis, her seizures were tracked by specialists who answered a phone on the first ring instead of the 5th. Elena's violin, recovered undamaged from Renzo's hideout, exactly as her own instinct had told her when she'd caught the hesitation in his lie, was returned to her by Dante himself, placed gently into her waiting hands on the same estate balcony where, 5 nights after the gala, he finally told her plainly what his silences had been circling for weeks. Marco, for his part, was given full authority over the family's internal security review, a quiet promotion that came with no ceremony. Only Dante's private acknowledgement that the one man who had never needed to perform loyalty was the only one who'd never had reason to betray it. I don't want you here because I need a witness anymore, he said. I want you here because leaving means losing the only person who's ever made me feel like the Empire wasn't the only thing worth protecting. That sounds dangerously close to mine, Elena said. And I never agreed to be owned by anyone, boss or not. Then don't be owned, Dante said. Be chosen. There's a difference, and I intend to spend a long time proving I finally understand it. Elena considered that, her fingers finding the familiar grain of her violin's neck, the instrument that had once warned a stranger about death arriving from a rooftop and had since become the thread tying her whole rewritten life together. Then I'm choosing to stay, she said. Not because you're a mafia boss. Because you finally told me the truth when it cost you something to tell it. He didn't call her mine. He simply stood beside her at the railing, close enough that his shoulder brushed hers, and let the silence between them become something chosen instead of something imposed. The same silence that had first told her, on a crowded street days earlier, that a dangerous man was listening to her the way almost no one ever had. She lifted her bow and played the same partita from that first evening, the notes now carrying a different weight entirely. Not a warning this time, but an ending finally allowed to be gentle. Somewhere below the balcony, she heard Marco's footsteps pause in the courtyard to listen, and further off, Mia's laughter drifting from an open window, ordinary and unafraid in a way it hadn't been in years. Kindness had put her between a stranger and a bullet. Truth had put her between an empire and its own worst inheritance. And in the end, it was neither fear nor power that decided what came next, but the simple, hard-won fact that she had been given, at last, the freedom to choose it for herself. If you had heard that rooftop click before anyone else, would you have risked everything to warn a stranger, knowing it might cost you your own safety? If this story kept you listening the way Elena listens to the world, tell us in the comments where you'd have drawn your own line between protection and freedom. And subscribe for the next story where an ordinary person's quiet courage changes the fate of a criminal empire.